the whole town, came to watch him hang. They brought their children, their Bible, and their baskets. They wanted to see justice served to the devil's own son. But they know the devil wasn't on the gallows that day. He was standing right next to the preacher, wearing a collar and a smile. The rope was rough against Jack McCade's neck. He could feel his pulse thumping against the hemp. A drum, counting down the last seconds of his life. Below him, the faces of Redemption Ridge blurred into a sea of hatred. He'd robbed their banks, sure, but he'd never killed a man who didn't need killing. To them, that was the same sin. Jack whispers to himself, "They expect me to beg, to cry, to give them the show." He didn't. He looked past the crowd, past the saloon, past the whitewashed church, and stared at the vast, indifferent desert beyond freedom. Someone shouted out loud, "This man isn't evil, you see. He's the reason my daughter is alive. 3 months ago, my daughter Ruth was traveling the Devil's Pass. The stagecoach lost its wheel. The horse panicked. It went over the cliff. Or it would have. A man appeared from the rocks. A wanted man. An outlaw. He didn't think. He didn't bargain. He threw himself into the chaos and pulled her out seconds before the carriage shattered against the canyon floor. He pulled her from the wreckage. He didn't rob her. He didn't speak a single word of greed. He looked at her, just looked as if he was seeing something he had forgotten existed in this world, and then he vanished, back into the smoke, back into the life he thought he deserved. He never asked for a reward. He never even told her his name. But she never forgot his face, and neither did I. The sheriff agreed. The rope was loosened. Jack fell to his knees, gasping for air. He thought he'd never breathe again. But he didn't look at the sky. He didn't look at his freedom. He looked up, past the preacher, past the crowd, to a window, and there she was, the girl he saved, the girl who saved him right back. He understood that he was now not running from death, but was walking towards something far more terrifying, a reason to live. The air was thick enough to choke on. The sheriff's hand hovered over the lever, his knuckles white, but Preacher Elias stood his ground, holding up that tear-stained letter like a shield against the mob. "This man saved my daughter," he shouted, his voice cracking against the wind. "If you hang him, you hang me first." The sheriff was a man of the law, but even he knew you couldn't fight God in broad daylight. He leaned in. His voice a low growl meant only for the preacher's ears. "You want to play savior, Elias? Fine. But he doesn't walk free. He belongs to you now, your land, your chains. If he runs, your neck replaces his in that noose. He wasn't a guest. He was a prisoner in plain sight. Every swing of axe was a prayer he didn't know how to speak. Every splinter was a sin he was trying to bleed out of his hands. The preacher called it penance. Jack called it survival. But survival wasn't the hard part. The hard part was silence. The way the morning stretched into afternoons with nothing but the sound of his own breathing and the distant hum of a town that wanted him dead. She never said much, just a soft footstep in the dust, the gentle clink of a cup being set down. Jack's hand froze halfway to the cup. He could feel the heat coming off her skin before he even touched her. And he knew if he let his fingers brush hers even by accident, he would be crossing a line there was no commie G back from. His hand hovered, trembling. She didn't pull away. For 5 heartbeats, the world stopped spinning. He didn't sleep that night. The barn was cold, but that wasn't it. Sleep had become a stranger to Jack McCade, years ago chased away by the ghosts of men he'd outdrawn and the echo of his own footsteps running from the law. But last night was different. Last night, he couldn't shake the image of her silhouette in the window. The way she looked at him, not with fear, not with pity, but with something that looked terrifying like hope. Each cur of wood he'd cut falling to the barn floor felt like confession, E.S. He wasn't a religious man. He didn't believe on a God who cared about outlaws. But as he placed that rose on the pump, he felt like he was leaving an offering at an altar. He walked away before the sun fully rose. He couldn't bear to see her find it. because if she threw it Vawe, he wasn't sure there was anything left of him to save. Duth had always been a practical girl. She sits in the pew and listens to sermons about restraint and purity and the dangers of the flesh. She had learned to move through the world quietly, to make herself small, to not want things. She thought it was weed at first. She lifted it, and her breath caught in her throat. It was a rose, carved by a hand that had held a gun far more often than a knife. Those imperfections were the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, because they were proof that the man who made it wasn't a monster. Monsters don't leave gifts. I'm the dark, too afraid to claim them. A man who had faced down a firing squad was too afraid to watch her find a gift. That wasn't cowardice. That was a man who has something to lose for the first time in his life. She knew whatever happened next, her heart was no longer entirely her own. She found him in the barn. He was working on a saddle, or pretend OMG2, his back to the door. He didn't turn around when she walked in, but she saw his shoulders stiffen. He knew she had come. "You made this?" she said. Not a question. "It's beautiful," she whispered. That made him stop. His hands went still. Slowly, he turned. She was close now. Too close. Close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her eyes, the way her lips were slightly parted, the rose pressed against her heart like a shield. The storm did nothing to hide the poison spewing from the preacher's lips. Jack stood in the doorway of the barn, the cold rain soaking through his shirt, but he couldn't move. He watched the silhouette dance against the amber glass. Ruth's shadow crumpled as her father's voice boomed. The words hit Jack harder than any bullet ever had. He realized with a sickening clarity. The preacher didn't see a man seeking redemption, he saw a disease. The next day, while the town was praying, Jack slipped into the church. He was looking for God. He was looking for the truth. His fingers traced the floorboards until he found it. A loose park near the altar. What he found beneath shattered every prayer he'd ever pretended to believe. A stack of wanted posters, his brothies' faces, the man who taught him how to ride, the man the preacher claimed to have never met. Jack's jaw tightened. The preacher didn't save him out of gratitude. He saved him because Jack was the only key to a door the holy man had been trying to open for 20 years. The truth had weight and felt like a hammer. Jack McCade spent his life running for romance lawmen. The priest knew his gang. "You knew Benjamin Cross? He was my brother," the priest said. "The man who raised hell across through territories. I didn't save you for God, Jack. I saved you because you're the key to killing my own blood." In the barn with the last light of day painting them gold, Jack finally let his walls fall. The priest stood in the doorway, his silhouette a dark wound against the sky. Jack braced for the fury. The shouting, the Bible verses hurled like stones. Instead, the preacher smiled. It was the smile of a man who had just found the perfect cage for both of them. There was a gunfire that ended as suddenly as it began. Benjamin Cross was in chains. The score was settled. But Elias the preacher was lying bleeding against a cold rock, the man who had come for revenge now paying the price with his own blood. "I was wrong." Lewis gasped, boss voice barely a whisper. "I preached grace my whole life but never understood it. I couldn't give it to my brother. I couldn't give it to you." And in that canyon, surrounded by smoke and spent bullet casings, an outlaw became a son. A winner became a savior. Elias closed his eyes. Not in death, but in surrender. The preacher has finally laid down his hate. And the greatest redemption wasn't found in a church, it was found in forgiveness.